Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Council meeting of the 14th of October 2024. This meeting has been called to discuss a specific business item. The meeting will commence with the acknowledgement of country, and I will read the acknowledgement. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people as the traditional owners and original custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to elders from other communities who may be watching this meeting. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile phones are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. The meeting is being live streamed on Council's website, so you can watch proceedings of the meeting, Council deliberations and voting. The meeting will also be recorded and made available on Council's website as soon as practicable after the meeting. My name is Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth and I'm the Mayor of the Boroondara City Council. I will start by introducing my fellow councillor colleagues. Seated to the left of the horseshoe table in this chamber is Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Nick Stavrou, Councillor Wes Galt, Councillor Di Gillies, and on the opposite side of the horseshoe, Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Addis, Councillor Susan Bigger, and Councillor Victor Franco. I also acknowledge in attendance this evening our Chief Executive Officer, Mr Philip Storer, sitting to my right, and on my left, Manager of Governance and Legal, Mr Brian Wee. I acknowledge there are no apologies this evening as we have all councillors in attendance. We will now move to declaration of conflict of interest. Councillors or councillor officers, are there any conflicts that anyone wishes to declare? I see no lights on. We will now move into the presentation of Officer Report. 3.1, Adoption of Annual Report. This item will be introduced by Nigel. Good evening, Nigel. How are you? And Nigel, would you like to introduce yourself and your position?
Nigel Morris, the Director of Customer and Transformation.
Thank you.
The purpose of this report is to present the 2023-24 Annual Report to Council for endorsement. The report is designed to provide performance reporting on both the Annual Report for 23-24 and the Boroondara Community Plan. The draft Annual Report has been prepared from information provided by officers across the organisation in accordance with Section 98 of the Local Government Act 2020. The report sets out council highlights, challenges, major achievements showcasing our delivery against the 7 themes of the Community Plan, information about the operations of Council, the audited financial statements and performance statement, which includes our audited results achieved against the prescribed performance indicators and measures. This was adopted by the Council on the 23rd of September. The report fairly represents Council's operations, financial positions and performance for the financial year, and the information presents satisfies all legislative requirements. I wanted to note that this year's annual report differs from the previous one due to the caretaker period. Typically, the report includes a Mayor's message showcasing all of the Council's achievements for the previous financial year. However, following legal advice we received on external messages during the caretaker period, the Mayor's message has been omitted and our updates have been required to be kept concise and factual. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. And councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Stavrou.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of questions for the officers. Excuse me. Just wanted to ask whether the financial statements have gone through independent reviews at all through committees?
Through the Chair, they have now been signed off and they were also presented to the Audit and Risk Committee previously.
Thank you. And my second question is, have we had a relatively clean health bill of health from the Victorian Auditor General's office?
Through the Chair, yes, that has been provided.
Can I ask a follow-up, perhaps, just for the community, not so much for myself? Does that happen every year?
Through the Chair, that's correct.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Stavrou. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, I don't have any questions, but I'm ready to move a motion when the time is right.
Thank you. And Councillor Gold?
Thanks very much. I'd just like to make a couple of comments about the report. Under environmental, we said we're making great progress towards achievement of the Climate Action Plan, but we don't actually measure that. So we don't actually know.
Point of order, as this is time for questions, not comments.
I shall
Sorry,
rephrase
Councillor
it.
Sinfield, I thought you said foreshadowed to move a motion. Did you say you were moving the motion?
Apologies, I said when the time is right.
Yes. Thank you. So, Councillor Gold, please proceed with
I
your
shall
question.
reword it
Thank
then.
you.
How do we know we're making progress towards the achievement of the Climate Action Plan if we don't measure it?
Through you, Madam Mayor, perhaps if I can assist in that the reporting on our Climate Action Plan is through Council's website. We have a hub which provides reporting of all of the actions in the Climate Action Plan, which is available for the community to see and is updated regularly.
But does it actually in any way measure the progress we're making on the empirical targets?
Again, through Madam Mayor, the reporting on, I don't have it open in front of me, but the reporting on the targets is conducted on an annual basis and published through that as well. It's not a live update, if you like, in that respect, but is again provided on an annual basis on those targets.
Perhaps, Madam Mayor, I could add to that by saying that the Council itself approves what it is that it wants done in order to respond to the Climate Action Plan as part of the budget process. So you set out the measures you would like to have Council take in a given year, and as you know, the staff report back against each of those measures. So the response really is, the question perhaps should be, have we done the things which you said we would do in that particular year? And if you'd like to put that, I'm sure Mr. Frere would be able to respond. But what we do, in fact, is very much driven by the council decision of which you've been part.
Thank you. My second comment's to do with neighbourhood character and heritage. And I notice there's no mention there made of the current threats we're facing from overlays and change of the planning things. I realise that follows the supposed date for the end of this report.
Chair, I repeat the objection taken by Councillor Watson. This is time for questions, not preambles, and the purported questioner actually gave it away by prefacing his comment in his own words. This isn't a question.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Gold.
I'm happy to reword that.
Thank you.
Further on in the report, from that, we do actually mention the dilemma we're currently going through. I'm just interested to know why we don't mention it in the neighbourhood and character and heritage section of the report.
Mr. Sora, thank you.
Perhaps I wonder whether Councillor Golcher might be a little more expansive in the question, just so that Mr. Walker understands exactly what it is that you're seeking.
I did attempt that, but I'll attempt it again. When reading through that section, I expected to see some mention of that, but I do realise most of it has followed the writing of this report. But further on in the report, in the economic factors section, we do in fact mention it. So I'm not asking for it to be changed, but it's just such a huge item in the life of this municipality. I thought it might be worth mentioning there as well.
So I'm actually confused.
Thank you, Councillor Gold.
Madam Mayor, can I just ask a question, because I don't understand. You've said something that's missing, but I'm not sure what it is. Can you clarify it so that I can understand it?
That's what I was doing the preamble for. Thank you, Councillor. We're currently...
Chair, we ought to just move on. There was no question, despite two objections, an ample opportunity to phrase a question. No question was phrased.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Councillor Stavry, who has asked for clarification. Councillor Gold is now proceeding to do that. Councillor Gold, if you could please answer the question fairly quickly. Thank you.
There is a mention. I'm asking why in the neighbourhood character and heritage portion of the report, there is no mention of the current proposed changes to the planning regulations from state, whereas it is mentioned in the economic factors section.
All right, thank you,
Thank
Councillor
you.
Gold. Mr Sora, would you like to respond to that?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm happy to provide some comment on that.
Thank you.
The reference in the economic development section is to the Camberwell Structure and Place Plan, which was adopted by Council in March this year, and that's why there is a broader reference to that Council position in regard to that plan. In terms of the specific planning reform changes that have potential impact on heritage within the Camberwell growth catchment, walkable catchment around Camberwell Junction Activity Centre, there was no knowledge of that at the time that this report applies to, and that's why there's no specific reference to that. That was not information that was available for this report.
Thank you, Mr Walker.
Thank you. And Councillor Stavro, does that conclude your question? Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a couple of questions. The first question is relates to the Burundara Arts program, and I note that we have a number of new measures, which is terrific. But do we have a way of demonstrating or showing the arts program that relates to our multicultural community? Because as we certainly can see in the statistics in this particular report, that we are a very multicultural community. Do we capture that, or do we address that anywhere?
Go to Director McCaughey, please.
Thank you, Chair. The way that we celebrate multiculturalism in our arts program is to really integrate it, so we don't have a separate multicultural program, but we just program with a really diverse range of artists and performing arts organisations and visual artists. So it's not a standalone program, it's just embedded in the work we do every day.
I see, thank you. And my second question relates to some of the questions and comments made by Councillor Galt relating to climate change. Do we understand, or do we know how much money we spend on climate change, given that my understanding is that there's a great deal of initiative actually embedded in everything that we do? So it might be a little bit of a difficult question to answer, but if you could please try.
Mr Freer, thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the Climate Action Plan has an implementation budget associated with that. From memory, that's $1 million per financial year. There are a range of other initiatives outside of that capital program as a discrete program through our other projects. So, for instance, in a construction project or a building project, or there may be an allocation that is provided as part of that project for solar or for water management or whatever it might be associated with that. We don't draw out all of those individual numbers to then provide a grand total, but they are captured within a range of other projects and initiatives that are delivered by the Council.
Thank you. Follow-up question, if I may. Is it possible going forward to be able to draw out some of what was just talked about, so that the community doesn't think that if there isn't a program with a label and a number associated with it, if they see that, then that is all that we do? And I think that perhaps something for consideration of the next council is that we capture more of what we do, so that the community understand that it's deeply embedded in the organisation. So I'll leave my questions and comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Sorry, Mr Freer.
Through Madam Mayor, we'll take that on notice and look to see how we might be able to achieve that.
Thank you. Now, I see no other lights on, so I will go to Councillor Sinfield, who foreshadowed the motion.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'm very happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. And I'm in search of a seconder, Councillor Stavro.
Have a second, Madam Mayor.
Right, thank you. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? See no opposition. Councillor Sinfield, would you like to speak to the motion?
Shall I reserve my comments for a moment, as I understand you have a few words prepared to say about the annual report?
Thank you very much for that. If I may, with your indulgence, as this is the last council meeting for this year, I just wanted to speak and recognise the significance of this report and acknowledge people in this room. The City of Boroondara Annual Report 23 to 24 outlines the performance of numerous projects, policies, programs and initiatives that have been delivered or are foreshadowed to be delivered in the years ahead, that reflect the core values of Council's commitment to community. The core values being customer, integrity, respect, collaborate, innovate and own it. This report is a culmination of not just this year, but of this 4-year council term. This report outlines the delivery of key strategic objectives reflecting the voice of community as captured during the development of the 2021 to 31 Boroondara Community Plan. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the exceptional service and dedication of council staff, starting with the Chief Financial Officer, Mr Philip Storer, who has captained the ship, facilitating and supporting the organisational needs to be well positioned to deliver priority projects, navigating through at times complex conditions and delivering us to calmer waters. I'd also like to acknowledge Mr Brian Wee, Manager of Governance, and his diligent team that coordinate public meetings here in the gallery off-site, but also all the civic events. Directors and managers for attending to their comprehensive portfolios, ranging from urban planning through to placemaking to community services, and with Nigel sitting here beside Mr Storer, information and technology, and everything in between. My fellow councillor colleagues, who have had the honour to serve with over the last 4 years, who present in the chamber every Monday evening to deliberate on complex and challenging agenda items that we often express conflicting opinions on, reflecting the values of democracy, representing a diverse range of views. At the last council meeting on the 23rd of September, we acknowledged the service of Councillor Park, Councillor Thompson and Councillor Biggar as retiring councillors. Tonight, I would like to thank all councillors collectively for their passion, professionalism and pragmatic approach to each and every meeting, whether it be in the chamber or on an advisory committee they serve. I would also like to thank Deputy Mayor for her willingness to step in and step up when situations have arisen throughout the year. She's been a wonderful support to me, and thank you very much. And to the Urban Planning and Services Delegated Committee Chairs for officiating proceedings with compassion, composure and calm. Thank you for your service. And last but certainly not least, our community, who have participated in numerous iterations of community consultation, who have attended meetings and presented impeccably on matters of significant importance to them, to organisations, to entities and to our community. And the power of their collective voice for the benefit of current and future generations has been heard, and we thank our community very much. To each and everyone here in the room and watching on this evening, I thank you all and appreciate your support and contribution to community. Now, Councillor Sinfield, I will go back to you as the mover of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll keep my comments very brief because we are in caretaker mode. There are significant achievements in this annual report, and I thank the officers for putting it together and encapsulating all that 2023-2024 has been. We appreciate the mountain of work that goes into such an annual report. However, I do note that it is the financial year 2023 to 2024, which is why there is little made of the state government housing targets and so forth, because that has all transpired since the 30th of June, and therefore is probably not appropriate to include in the annual report. Not for a moment to diminish the gigantic, significant, generational, foundational changes that the state Labor government has proposed. I encourage our community to read this annual report. It is exceptional, and I commend it to my colleagues.
Thank you. And as the motion is unopposed, I will now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We will now move on to an item of urgent business. This item, I believe, will be introduced. Oh, sorry. And before we go into urgent business, we need to actually acknowledge and admit the item of urgent business. So, on the screen behind me, I would now call upon Councillor Gillies. Would you like to resolve that this matter become a matter of urgent business?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I do have a matter of urgent business for tonight's meeting, and I do have a motion when the time is ready, and I believe the Director of Statutory Planning will give us a verbal report before my comments. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Gillies. Now I'm in search of a seconder. Councillor Biggar.
Yes, I'm happy to second that.
All right, thank you. And is there anyone in opposition? I see no one opposed. I will now... Sorry, Councillor Park?
I'm not sure that you've met the threshold yet. With due respect, the governance rules are pretty clear. I haven't heard anything to convince me that it's urgent.
Thank you, Councillor Park.
There's been no objection. It's been moved and seconded.
Well, sorry, look, it has been moved and seconded. Is there anyone opposed?
Perhaps, Madam Mayor, I can assist by making the point that the rules require that this be a matter which cannot easily be deferred to a later meeting of Council, and that the issue has arisen in a way in which it could not have been included in this report. And it might be helpful for Councillor Gillies to address briefly what those matters are.
Thank you. Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, Chair. This is a matter that arose Friday afternoon after close of business, and officers have been given until close of business this Wednesday to respond. So therefore, it is a matter of urgent business that cannot wait for a future meeting. In fact, officers have not even had a chance to give us a written report, but we do have a verbal report, please, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. I will...
Councillor Biggar, do you still second?
I'm not sure what the matter is, though, is the problem.
Through you, Chair, the matter is regarding documents from the State Planning Department regarding the built form overlay schedule.
In what precinct? The precinct, sorry. In the precinct of?
Camberwell Junction, but
Thank
it
you.
will pertain to Boorandarra.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Gillies. Councillor Biggar, you're happy to second the motion based on what Councillor Gillies has just said, is that correct?
Well, it depends. If the rest of my councillor colleagues are not comfortable that they've had enough information, then maybe we should, there's no point really in me doing that if we need to ensure that people have enough information to be comfortable that this is urgent business. So, and the feeling I'm getting is that we haven't quite reached that yet.
Reached the threshold?
Can we not have the officers give us some description of what this would be?
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Biggar.
I'm happy to second that if Councillor Biggar doesn't want to second it. I think I've heard enough, then I'm satisfied.
All right, thank you, Councillor Stavrou. Then if the motion is second, is there anyone opposed to go into urgent business so we can actually allow the Director to explain what the matter is that we need to discuss this evening or hear a presentation on? Is there anyone opposed to that? I see no opposition. I will put the motion. Those in favour? We will now move into urgent business. Thank you. I declare that carried. The matter has now been admitted as a matter of urgent business. I call upon the Director of Urban Planning, Mr. Scott Walker, to come and introduce the item. As Councillor Gillies said, this is a verbal presentation, so we do not have a written report to refer to on this.
Thanks, Mayor. Happy to introduce this item and give a little bit of a background and explanation and some initial comments by officers. What this urgent business item relates to is the Camberwell Junction Activity Centre, and it in fact is the third part, if you like, of the activity centre framework that has been subject to previous reports over recent weeks. I think a submission was lodged late September in regard to the overall high-level strategic plan for the Camberwell Junction Activity Centre that has been put together by the Victorian State Government and was subject to consultation closing on the 29th of September with the wider community. There was a second part which is in regard to built form overlay provisions and walkable catchment zone provisions that were subject to a recent report at a UPDC meeting, in fact last week, in which there was a formal submission put on those head provisions. That was the second part, and that was the detailed framework of planning that the Victorian State Government has put together for activity centres that applies or is intended to apply at Camberwell, as well as the other 9 pilot activity centres in Melbourne, but would then be a model rolled out across other activity centres across the state. This is the third part that I flagged at that meeting last Monday evening, which was received late on Friday evening, in fact after 5 o'clock, after close of business on Friday, and the Department of Transport and Planning and Victorian Planning Authority has asked for feedback on that draft planning control by Wednesday of this week. What that control is the schedule that attaches to the built form overlay. And that schedule is the detail of how the planning controls will apply at Camberwell Junction. Now, I would point out that what this relates to is the core activity centre. This is the activity centre area that our Camberwell Junction structure and place plan applies to. This schedule to the overlay is not about the walkable catchments, and we've raised significant concern about the walkable catchments. This is a focus in on the core of the activity centre that we envisaged in our Camberwell Junction and place plan that we approved in March this year. Officers will be reviewing this schedule and providing initial feedback to the Department of Transport and Planning on Wednesday this week, and there will be subsequent discussions with the department to push towards or edge towards what will be hopefully an acceptable and appropriate schedule that implements the provisions and intent of our structure and place plan. The first review that's been undertaken of the schedule indicates that it includes many of the elements in our structure and place plan around building height, around street wall heights, around setbacks, building separations, floor to ceiling heights, overshadowing, laneway widening. So there's many elements in that schedule that are very consistent with and translate what is in the council plan. That's the good part. There It is quite a convoluted control, and the control has some complexity to it in the way that it flips backwards and forwards between the head provisions and makes references between the two. And it makes it quite convoluted and problematic to work through. It's purported to be a simplification of the planning system. We don't see that in what we've seen so far. It's actually quite complex. And there are some parts of the schedule that remain in draft only or haven't been yet fully populated. And so that's certainly something that we'll be pointing out and asking questions about with the Department of Transport and Planning. We also haven't had the ability yet to road test those controls with an example application. So that road testing, if you like, we will now work our way through over the coming days to see how development outcomes are achieved when they are tested against these controls. One particularly important element to point out is that in regard to building heights, there is a proposal for a minimum and maximum deemed to comply height. And what those heights are is a minimum height that development should be at and a maximum height that development shouldn't go above. The maximum heights are consistent with the heights in our structure and place plan. There is an ability to go above those heights subject to a discretionary consideration in the way that so they're not a capped mandatory height. There is a discretion to go above. Developments that are above the maximum height or below the minimum, and this is a new concept, having a minimum height, would need to go through full public notification and have third-party review opportunities. But any development that is deemed to comply, in effect, meeting the minimum height and meets the maximum or below the maximum height would be exempt from public notification and third-party review. The interesting component of having a lower minimum height threshold, there's certainly a good element of that in essentially what that's trying to do is introduce a concept where if a development is below that minimum height, it may not be supported because it may well be deemed an underdevelopment of the site, not making the most out of a particular development site, which is certainly seen as a generally positive introduction to a schedule like this. Some of the other particular points to raise really is the way that they've structured the precinct build-up within this new schedule does very much mirror the precincts that we've included in our structure and place plan, and the objectives that are aimed to be achieved within those particular precincts are consistent with our structure and place plan. The element of concern that we think is missing, however, is the policy level from the plan that we propose to include within the planning scheme. We're not clear, we don't believe that there is an intention to include that policy level within the planning scheme. We think that there's been an attempt to try and build that into the schedule, but we need to see clarification about that particular component. That would be another area of particular concern. So in summary, overall, we're concerned about the short timeframes in which we need to provide the comments. We will work with the department and give feedback on those. There are some good elements here and an apparent alignment with our structure and place plan, but we still need to test it and work through the devil in the detail, if you like, to make sure that it will work and will work appropriately to achieve the right outcomes for Boroondara.
Thank you, Mr Walker. I see lights on. Councillor Stavrey, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, a question for Mr Walker. I may not have quite understood it when you were explaining it, Mr Walker, but has the 800-metre boundary that was foreshadowed, is that included in the update, or is that one of the detail? And if it's detail, it's a big detail to be omitted.
Again, through yourself, Mayor, I'll probably just just reiterate that this schedule is about the core activity centre. It's about what we proposed in our structure and place plan. It has no relationship, relevance or bearing to the 800-metre walkable growth catchment zone that is proposed around the activity centre. We've raised significant concern about that 800-metre growth. We will continue to raise that. That will be something that will be a strong talking point, but that's not what this is about. This is about the core of the activity centre.
Okay. It just struck me as odd to have made a comment about the activity centre to us and not have included a major part that includes the same activity centre. That was the real, I guess, befuddlement that I had. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stavrou. Councillor Franco.
Thank you. A couple of questions through you, Madam Mayor. Does the draft schedule apply to all 10 activity centres and in the same way? And do we know if all 10 councillors were given the draft schedule at the same time last Friday and whether they were provided the same very short time frame in which to respond?
Thanks through yourself, Mayor. Not all of the 10 activity centres have schedules like this. Most do. There are some exceptions to that. For example, the Maroondah Activity Centre is structured in a different way because it already had an activity centre zone that had a series of schedules similar to these types of schedules that are before us for Camberwell. So the Maroondah Activity Centre, for example, does not have a new schedule because it already had a framework very similar to this. Most of the other within the 10 have schedules similar. I understand a majority of those councils received those schedules Friday afternoon. Some of my colleagues in those councils that I spoke to Friday afternoon hadn't received them at that point. Some had. We didn't receive ours until after 5 o'clock. So they were rolled out throughout the afternoon. Most will should now have those schedules or have received those schedules. And they have the same time frame, Wednesday.
And just to be clear, so your understanding is that they're largely generic. I mean, putting aside the example of Maroondah, it's not tailored to Camberwell Junction Activity Centre, but they're generic to the extent that they can be generic, is your understanding?
Well, okay, so this is where it gets a little bit, this is where it does deviate out a little bit. The way that the government has gone about building up these schedules is by developing a high-level activity centre plan, working their way through particular typologies of precincts within those plans, and then using material which was presented to the UPDC meeting last Monday evening, using that material to arrive at final schedules for each of the activity centres. And there was essentially a formula put forward in the documentation that was provided last Monday evening, and that formula will play out depending on the different parts of a precinct for each activity centre, whether that's proximity to the shops, main roads, railway stations and the like. There were some centres where the councils had significantly progressed work for those activity centres that methodology has not been applied because it would have been repeating work that it was already done. So for places like Frankston, Preston and Camberwell, the preference was to defer to the work that had been done by the councils rather than the generic methodology established by those plans. So it varies activity centre by activity centre depending on where the council was up to in their strategic planning work.
Thank you. Another question. Is the schedule, the draft schedule, publicly available? I note that it's not attached to a report here, but has it been provided on a confidential basis? And can we make it public and make it available on our website?
To yourself, Chair, it hasn't been provided on a confidential basis, but it also, I would say, it's quite a technical document that needs a significant amount of analysis and work. It might not be particularly helpful for the general public to be consuming at this point, but I have no problem in providing it to anyone should they wish to review it. We will be going on an iterative process of working with the Department of Transport and Planning to try and get significant improvements to the schedule where needed. So,
And
I can't see any reason why it can't be made available. I'm happy to make it available to anyone that would like the copy.
And the same for any submission that we may make in relation to it, presumably. And just a final question. In your in the director's presentation, you mentioned the good and the bad, but which is a nice expression, but you didn't, in addressing what you considered the deficiencies with it. Did that relate specifically to the convoluted nature, or were you going to add something else in that regard? It'd be good to know if there were some additional points.
I think there's a couple of, there were two key things. It's the convoluted nature and complexity of the schedule and the way that works with the head provisions. It is very, very cumbersome to work between the two, the way that they've structured this. There is also some policy elements that we think may be missing. Those policy elements may be critical or important to influencing and guiding the right development outcomes, so giving sufficient policy guidelines for council to make the right decisions and get the right outcomes in relation to development proposals, applications that are put forward for mixed-use developments within the activity centre. And the third element really is an unknown yet. We want to road test and test some of the larger developments similar to what we've already considered under our current frameworks in recent times against this framework and see what would flow out.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. And before I go across to Councillor Galt, if I might just ask a question on the back of Councillor Franco's question with regard to the conversation I had with you earlier today. Could you just comment for the benefit of the gallery where the information is on Burundara's website up until this point, if anyone wants to go and reference documents?
Yes, there is a specific page that the council has developed for its website which outlines the Victorian government planning changes in some detail. And there is a link actually at the moment on the front page of the website that links direct to that page. And that page works through all of the various reports, submissions and available material that the public can have a look at, consume and understand more about what proposals have been put forward.
Thank you, Mr Walker. Councillor Galt.
Thank you. Just a very small extension to Councillor Stavro's question. And you've been very clear in saying that the response you have received does not apply to the walkable catchment zone. Could I ask you to just confirm there was no comments made in it anywhere with regard to the potential treatment of heritage overlay areas?
Thanks, through yourself, Mayor. And in fact, that's actually probably a positive element of the draft schedule that's been put forward, is there's actually quite significant reference to heritage within it. So it gives confidence that we have the right framework to enable us to understand, reference and protect heritage properties within the activity centre core as part of this framework. In fact, as part of the schedules, schedule number 2 is to protect the heritage and Main Street character of Burke Road, the junction and landmark heritage places within the centre and the amenity of adjoining residential zone land at sensitive interfaces. So there's There's then subsequent specific sections that then deal with acknowledging, understanding and respecting heritage.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. If I may just ask one more question quickly. With the deemed to comply, providing it meets either the minimum height threshold or it's under the maximum height, does that imply that council will be the responsible authority to process the application?
Through yourself, Mayor, yes, council will still be the responsible authority in the way that this schedule is formed or put forward. There's no specific reference or direction that the applications will be dealt with in any other forum. Having said that, there are and remain general provisions within this planning scheme that enable an applicant for particular types of application over a certain size or scale or mixture of development to ask for that application to be referred to the Development Facilitation Program, which is a state government program. But that's an optional choice for certain types of development for the applicant. That's not automatic. It can still come through council.
Thank you, Mr Walker. Now, I see... I was going to go to Councillor Gillies, who foreshadowed the motion, but Councillor Stavrou, you've got your light on.
Yeah, with your indulgence, Madam Mayor. Look, with regards to what Councillor Gold just sort of reiterated the question and what you've just said, Mr Walker, I'm a little bit confused as to if you have a policy that was foreshadowed a few weeks ago with the 800 metres, and this is foreshadowing almost no drastic change, let's go with what Burundara Council is saying, is there a chance that they're walking it back, or they are providing us something that is going to change anyway, or they'll contradict themselves? I really just don't understand this.
Madam Mayor, I might just make the observation they're two entirely different but related things. So the planning controls which will apply to a commercial centre, in this case the activity centre itself, and those which will apply to the walkable catchment zone are entirely different controls.
No, I do understand that. Just if I may then, just to perhaps indulge me. So what we're saying is the other controls that were put earlier with the 800 metre sort of boundary, they will not have any effect in what's actually included here, whatever happens from their follow-up policy.
This doesn't cover that land.
Okay.
It only covers the land which is located in the activity centre. I'll call it the commercial zone.
Right. So the other one is excluded from. Okay.
Yes, that is yet to be subject to a detailed finalised
Thank you for that clarification. Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Stavrou. Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, Chair. My question, I think, was going to be regarding council's role as the responsible authority, but I think that's been addressed quite satisfactorily. Thank you. And you recalled that I had foreshadowed a motion. Thank you.
Yes. Now, would you like to see your motion now put on the screen?
Yes, please.
Pre-prepared. Thank you. Councillor Gillies, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'm happy to, but I might wait for a seconder if that's all right.
And Councillor Biggar.
I'm happy to second that.
All right, thank you. Councillor Gillies. Oh, sorry. Is there anyone, first of all, opposed to the motion? The reason I asked Councillor Gillies if she would like to speak to it is just to explain a little bit more of what this motion is actually about. But if we're happy to go straight into standard proceedings, is there anyone in opposition to this motion? I see no lights on. Councillor Gillies, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, I think it's pretty self-explanatory per the wording, but I would like to take a moment to thank Mr Walker and officers for bringing this to our attention as a matter of urgency. To have been provided with this documentation after 5 o'clock last Friday, given 3 business days to respond, really gives me very little confidence as to how the State Planning Department regards councils and the public we represent. However, I reiterate what I said last Monday, that officers are ready and willing to discuss a strategically justified and appropriate response And I commend the motion to my colleagues in a show of united response. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. And as there is no opposition, I will put the motion. Those in favour? I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Walker. The meeting is now to come to a close. This brings the meeting and order of business to conclusion. I thank all of you that have joined us in the gallery and online this evening, and I now declare the meeting closed at 7:27. Good evening, and thank you, everyone.